You are joining us live from beautiful autumnal Ithaca, New York, home to Cornell University. I'm your host, Chris Wofford, and we've got a lot to cover in this hour, so we are going to get right to it. I'm so pleased to welcome ILR School's Liz Karns back to the studio. It's been about 5 years. Thank you for coming back.
Yeah, it's a pleasure.
Thank you for joining us, viewers. I've got a few notes for you before we get started here. Per usual, this event is being recorded and will be viewable at the same URL afterward, right? So whether you're watching, if you have to leave this live recording, you want to share this with friends or colleagues, this URL is where you can watch this live session, but also the recorded session after we're through. Liz and I are going to be having a spirited conversation, but we'd like you to submit questions, your questions, in the chat, which you may open by clicking the dialog box at the top right of your video player. We'll also be asking you a few poll questions. Several of you may have seen the QR code that was kicked up before we got started. This will happen throughout, so heads up for that. Have your smartphones ready, because we are interested in your input. We've got about 6 or so polling questions to ask you. So again, that QR code will come up. Some of you have already begun answering as we see. So we'll catch up with that stuff in just a minute, everyone. Throughout our discussion, we're going to be sharing a few URLs and resources in the chat as well, so heads up for those. And if you're watching the archived recording that is after the live day today, those links will then be available in the overview section just below as the chat will close. So let's get right to it. Again, thank you, viewers, for joining us. Get your questions going as they come through, and I'll take them as they come up here on my iPad. So Liz, you are not only a senior lecturer at the ILR School at Cornell, you're also a lawyer, an epidemiologist. You are a faculty course author for several certificate programs and courses here available at Cornell. Tell us how this all comes together and how we have arrived at course production and you coming into the studio today. How do your experiences inform the work that you do at Cornell?
Yeah, well, in terms of just career path, I think that, like many people, my career is not linear.
Yep.
Right? So I was really interested in economics and in statistics, and public health was a really natural application for that.
Yeah.
So that's why I got a degree in epidemiology, which is all about the study of health and the statistical distribution of different issues. Right? Mm-hmm. All of my work, though, was going to legal issues. All of it. So after, 10 years or so of being an epidemiologist, I said, I want to go to law school. I want to ask those questions. Mm-hmm. And with both epidemiology and law, you've got a series of questions that you're always asking about. You're asking about, why did somebody make a decision? What informed them? Was it a requirement of the way they do their work? Mm-hmm. Or was it their own personal choice? And that's what brings in the ethics part too. Right? Mm-hmm. Is that frequently when I'm doing like a deposition of a statistician, for instance, mm-hmm. I could be asking about, how did you make certain choices in your analysis? And those choices are not something that are governed by law, but it's sometimes it's a personal choice, sometimes it's the professional preference, mm-hmm. or it's the scrutiny of others that will bring it in there. But it definitely informs your professional practice, your own ethics and your professional practice move together. Mm-hmm. So I've always taught things about data ethics in my stats classes as well. Mm-hmm. And people are frequently surprised to find out that they learn more about ethics in a stats class than they do in many other classes. Because I think it really matters, right? We have a big responsibility.
Yeah, exactly. And the stakes are really high. There's a lot going on right now. We're going to cover a lot. Audience, I want to draw your attention rather to the questions that we've posed to you a little bit earlier on. So, audience, do you read the terms and conditions when you download a new app? We were just joking about that a minute ago. We have all seen those agreements to the terms and conditions. You actually have to scroll through them so that it has the appearance of you having read them.
Right.
But many of us do just go right to the bottom. Where's that accept button? Let's do this thing, right? Yeah. So here's how our audience answered here. I skim over it quickly or almost never, and no one selected always every single word. Do you, knowing what you know, what do you?
So I sometimes, especially depending on the company, I will pause at different points. I look at different things. I think it's interesting.
Yeah.
Right? But the real question here is, what are we accepting when we accept terms and conditions?
Sure.
And the key part to me is the data aspect.
Yeah.
Right? What data are they permitted to collect from me? Mm-hmm. And I'm not terribly privacy concerned, but then how do they repackage and sell my data? So that's going to be in the terms and conditions. And that's what gets us into sort of what I think is this whole new whirlpool out there,
Yeah.
data swirling around us.
Right.
You know.
Exactly. Let's go to question number 2 for our audience. There's the QR code. Shoot that, please. Question number 2.
Okay.
Would you agree to your data being sold to other groups and used to build behavior predictions for others? You won't get any compensation or direct benefit for this
That's right.
kind of submittal. So the question is, would you agree to your data being sold? Do we have to read between the lines and talk about what this really means here, right? I mean,
Well, so what does this mean?
let's find out. So everyone says, no, I don't want my data to be sold to,
Exactly.
to other organizations and used to build behavior predictions for each other, for others rather. So invariably, we've got no. I think we were kicking up at 97% or something like that.
Yeah.
No surprise there.
No surprise, because nobody likes that feeling of my information is being used out there in the world. Maybe I've consented to it, but did I realize it would be sold as well? Right? That's a different thing. The next step, that I'm also part of a process which is going to predict and control somebody else's behavior or choices. I might be really uncomfortable with that. And yet, that's, once your data is sold, you have no idea of where it goes and how it's being used.
So we're talking about data in the context of predictive models.
Yeah.
You focus on those. What are they?
So a predictive model is the sort of thing which says, I have one outcome. Am I going to get this disease? Right? This is the clear one. And I have a bunch of variables that I use in order to predict whether I'm going to get a disease. Most of us have used like the Framingham, the cardiac check, right? To see, am I going to have a cardiovascular event in the next 10 years? The way that predictive models get a little bit out of control, if you will, is that we have lots of different variables that can come into them. And in the old way of doing science, if you will, old prior to the digital revolution, we would have an idea, collect some data, build some models, and then publish it, have other people challenge that data, have other people really consider whether or not this was a legitimate claim, this association, for instance. Predicting behavior in this way, does this make sense? And the difference now is that we don't have anybody scrutinizing the models. We just have all the data, and then it very quickly gets flipped into a prediction about what you're going to do.
So we're talking about a prediction for the likelihood of me getting heart disease, for instance.
Heart disease being a fraud risk.
What kind of data is out there related to these two outcomes
So
that I have, maybe
you've shared.
I've shared, yeah.
Okay, so the heart risk one is pretty easy, right?
Yeah.
All of your demographic characteristics.
Okay.
And then, do you use any kind of fitness tracker? Oh, if you use a fitness tracker, have you agreed to share that data? And, usually you have, because you want to be part of all that.
Sometimes you get an insurance discount.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Right, exactly.
Right.
And that means that the prediction about your development of heart disease is suddenly, possible, right? Very informed. It's not just your demographics, it's also your individual behavior.
What about my food choices, cholesterol intake, stuff like that? Is that all? Am I getting too paranoid too quick?
It's certainly possible. So
Okay.
food choices, think about it. If you go to any brand loyalty store, any place where you have a loyalty card,
Yeah.
they know everything you buy, right?
Yeah.
And can they share that data with others? Well, when you read those terms and conditions, that was your choice. That was the time when you realized, oh, they could sell it to others, right? But I want to be really clear. Predictive models are awesome, right? They're really good. But when we start using them for things that are limiting people's choices or using them as a replacement for government activity, then I think there's a problem.
And they're used in many different places, right? So the workplace is one that we're going to focus
Yeah.
on here.
Yeah.
How does it play out in the workplace?
So at this point, if you're looking for a job, you do not talk to other people to say, hey, do you have a job, right? You're going to post through LinkedIn. Your resume will get picked up and processed through some sort of predictive model to figure out whether you're a good fit for a firm.
Yes.
How do they decide if you're a good fit? Well, they're going to use their own data, usually from the past, to say, these are the people who have worked well, so we're looking for people similar to that.
And these are third-party vendors typically that do this kind of thing.
Very much.
Right? You farm this out.
Very much, yeah. And there's lots of companies that do, pretty extensive workplace products, right? Because it's not just hiring. Because hiring and recruitment, that's a big area. We all know that.
Sure.
But it's also about retention or about performance, right? Monitoring performance now is another sort of issue that comes into the data stream that is about me, right? If I am subjected to keystroke calculations, right? Then my employer has that, whoever collected it has it, and then they can use that. Again, it's a big, big world. Nobody's going to use all that data. It's not about me necessarily.
Yeah.
But it's about an amalgamation of information that we really need to be clear about how we use and how we decide to do things. So that's where, the ethics come in, right?
Do the models work? Are they effective? What's the state of the art?
Well, it would be lovely if we knew.
Oh.
We don't know.
Why don't we know?
Because there is for the most part, we have no regulation that describes the requirements of vendors to show the validation or reliability of their models. Unless you're in some sort of regulated specialty, there's nothing that says they have to show us how well they work.
What about the possible effect on the people from whom the data is being extracted and put into a model? You had talked about this concept of lives being upended.
Right. So this is the people who are using a model, right? Let's imagine, for instance, here's an example that we frequently use, and it's a license plate reader, and it is supposed to read license plates on a specific area where cars are not supposed to park. Right, so it's a bus zone, so you don't want cars in there.
Okay.
So license plate reader reads it, sends a fine to anybody who actually is parked there.
Right.
That seems like an okay thing, right?
Makes sense.
But it doesn't always work, right? So the example is somebody who was walking through that space and had something written on their shirt, and the AI read it, and it wasn't a match. It wasn't even a complete match. But it was like, close enough. Automatically sent out a ticket to the person who was, 120 miles away. They weren't even there. Now, that's not a big deal, right? They were able to get it reversed, but actually they had already accumulated some late charges, right? Those got reversed too, automated late charges.
Yep.
So there was a little bit of a, bump in that person's life.
Sure.
Big deal.
Right.
The bigger deal is when we are refusing people access to government benefits, for instance. We saw this a lot during COVID, that there were systems put in place which were supposed to be detecting fraudulent applications. And they were facial recognition. But it wasn't great facial recognition. So now we're merging together different technologies, none of which have been necessarily tested together.
Yeah.
But the person on the other side who's applying for unemployment benefits, say, and the facial recognition doesn't work for them, they are locked out. They cannot get easy resolution on this. And so it upends their life, right? They're already in a precarious spot. So again, you might say, well, of course, we expect some of that, right? This is the cost of doing business, essentially. But I would argue that, first off, we should expect more, right? If it's a computer, we should expect more. Or if it's a model, we should expect more. We don't have to accept a 10% error rate, which is what they were accepting for one state.
Okay.
They were saying it was okay for them to have 10% of the people being locked out of their unemployment system.
Holy, wow.
Right.
Yeah, that's shocking.
And, we can look at this in lots of different areas of modern civic life, right? Whether it's unemployment, other benefits, retirement, insurance, lots of different things. Yeah.
Good. Let's turn to the audience again.
Oh, yeah.
And get their feeling on a couple of the scenarios that we just discussed there. So in the case of the license plate identification and no parking zone kind of thing, let's ask our audience right now, how upset would you be if you received an automated fine and a notification based on your predicted activity, such as a car in a no parking spot kind of scenario. So the choices here are: I would be extremely upset. I am neutral on this. I think predicting my activity should be accepted as normal.
Okay.
All right. I don't know.
Great.
I threw those answers up because these are opinions on this technology, and extremely upset. So again, you had characterized it as a little bit of a blip in that person's life.
Right.
Yes, it's a drag. I've got this ticket. Now I've got late fees, and I've got to appeal this kind of thing. So yeah, it's disruptive. Not to the degree of unemployment benefits.
Right.
Right. But so we're talking about the car in the parking spot type thing. I'm neutral on this, 10%. I think it's fair to take away from this one that we're at overwhelmingly, extremely upset. I think, we're starting to see this kind of thing. You can get a ticket on the New York State Thruway.
Yep.
It's all kind of becoming normalized pretty quickly.
Yeah.
But at the same time, people are still extremely upset at 83%. Does that surprise you?
No, but I think we have no sense yet of how much things are automated, or more importantly, how do we appeal them, right? So how do I argue that I wasn't in this place, right? I have to prove somehow that I was 120 miles away.
Right.
And frequently automated systems don't have a mechanism for appeal built in. And that's, again, something that we really need to think carefully about before we start saying we're going to allow this type of technology to control the choices people have, or the actions we take against them.
So in the example of this, I'm just I'm going to a bunch of hypothetical places really quickly.
Okay.
But if this person were on this is in England or something, on the M5, and their plate was scanned elsewhere, and that particular data point was merged with the rest, wouldn't it be able to validate it? I don't know.
Well,
is that the
but
answer?
somebody has to say, oh, we're going to take all the systems then and put them together because we want to be absolutely certain that we're not issuing those sort of tickets.
Yeah.
Even then, we're not absolutely certain, right? There's going to be, if my car's in the garage, it's not going to be detected.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
But we have an assumption that goes with all of the technology that says, well, it's perfect, right? They've brought in all that data. But in fact, that takes many vendors, many different people have to or agencies have to cooperate. It's not going to happen.
Right. You got too many systems talking to each other. So question number 2, this is poll question number 6. Should you be able to appeal decisions made by predictive models? I think I know what the answer is going to be on this one. I suppose we'll see it in a second. We'll kick this one up and see what our audience thinks of this one here. Should you be able to appeal decisions? So in the case of insurance denial, things like that, what is the state of the art as it relates to that?
Well, so insurance is a special case, right? Because insurance actually has regulatory laws about any kind of denial of benefits, right? But they don't necessarily have any particular language that goes to how I price insurance, depending on the information I have about you, for instance. But, all of these things are human constructs. These are all things that people in the data science world are thinking about in terms of, we're bringing this data in, should we be using it, right? And it's up to them, right? This is the urgency part, is that we need to be training our students, and we need to build organizations that actually do have an ethical component to the data analysis, that we think through the consequences of these different things.
Good. Here are the answers. 100%, no problem there, right? You need to have recourse when it comes to appealing these decisions.
Yeah. Yep. And I would say it's often very hard to A, know that a predictive model has been used, and B, where you would go to appeal, right?
Yeah.
How would you do that? And that's a tough thing. It's a really tough thing. And again, when I think about the more marginal groups, people who don't have as easy access to the internet as we do, right? And you find out everything has to be done on the internet, then it's really, really difficult,
This is a big issue. It's like a sub part of our run of show here, but group effects, marginalized peoples.
Yeah.
What is going on with that? What are some of the concerns that we have to think about when building models?
Yeah. So models are supposed to, ideally, they are not biased, right? They are not preferring one group over another or giving one group some sort of treatment which leaves them better off or worse off than the others, right? It's supposed to be all about just the facts, if you will, right? But we know that's not what happens. We know that instead, models tend to, first we aggregate lots of information, and then we accelerate the application of that information or the deployment. So for instance, in the predictive policing, this is one example people use a lot. We end up with lots of information that then gets used against one group more than another, and it amplifies those effects against that group, and so you have more arrests and et cetera, right? But so predictive policing, we might say, but that's an okay thing. We want to know there's people doing bad things. But what about something like a photo cropping service, right? Where you put a photo up and it's supposed to center the photo in the middle of the space that you want it to be. And it does it automatically in order to optimize it for social media, right? Or for your workplace stuff. And those photos often will only focus on people who are of particular race and gender, right? And age groups. And they cut out everybody else. So they literally push them to the margin.
You mentioned women over a certain age.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
So
Is that what we're talking about here?
facial recognition. This is
the facial recognition.
This is
thing,
facial
yeah.
recognition.
Yeah.
But also photo centering stuff tends to not see older women very well, right? And just like sort of other groups that the data sets were not trained on or the models weren't trained on, they didn't have a lot of pictures of older women when they were training these data sets, right? So I, know of groups of people who are pretty much interchangeable on the Apple phone because they all look kind of the same.
Okay.
Right? Not what we expect.
No, that's not where we want to be.
Right. Right.
So are predictive models regulated? What's the state of that? Who's minding
the shop? Right. Right.
What's the deal?
Bottom line is they are not regulated.
Why not? Do you know why?
Well, I think it's moved really fast.
Yeah, okay. It's
right?
almost always the case, right?
Yeah.
Legal has to catch up with the tech.
Yeah, and it is really powerful. And as the costs come down, we can just do more and more and more. And that's exciting. And it's where people spend their energy is on the cutting edge as opposed to looking at the effects and, should we really be going there? So the regulatory aspect, I liken this to the early days of pharmaceuticals, right? Kind of the 1900s when you could get an elixir, right? This elixir will fix anything for you.
Yeah.
And there was nobody paying attention to what was actually in there. So what did we have? We had people who were blinded by the elixir or died from the elixir. And eventually we end up with the FDA, and the FDA requires that you prove that the elixir works and that the side effects are not worse than the actual problem that you have. That's what we need to have happen for models as well.
Yeah.
We're just not there yet. And we never will be, which again is why we need ethics, right? Because we need the people who are creating technology to have some sort of moral guidance, a moral compass as they develop things, right?
Yeah.
They need to think about, how is this going to affect the world, right? What are the consequences when I play this out? Not just the happy news, right?
Yeah.
But some of the other things as well.
I want to take a little bit of a diversion. I hope you'll forgive me, but
are
Senate hearings the answer to this kind of thing? Every once in a while, Senate will haul in a Jack Dorsey or a Mark Zuckerberg or someone because they want to know, A, what the hell's going on here, and B, what can we do about it, or what can you do about it?
Right.
As company head. Can you talk about the dynamic there as it relates to privacy, predictive models? I don't know.
So I think that the Senate is, or any kind of governmental body hearing these issues, should be doing it with this bigger idea of how are we benefiting the people?
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
But most of the time, they are woefully underinformed. They just don't understand what's actually happening. And there's some pretty, funny little clips about that. So, no, we can't wait. We can't wait for them.
So
right?
who has oversight of the models?
Well, it depends on where you are.
Yeah.
Right? Some communities are now developing oversight requirements. Right? So imagine you are in a town, the town has a police force, the police force wants to use, or the police department wants to use some of the different predictive models.
Yep. Right?
Well, that's fine, but we need oversight in terms of community input onto, is this acceptable? Should we be sharing data? What's our tolerance for misapplications, misidentifications, things like that. So we can have community participation, but it takes people being aware of the fact that this stuff is happening.
Yeah.
Right?
What about the model developers and people, getting a little more granular within that world? So
yeah.
How about oversight on that side? Because that's in the end what we're talking about here, right?
Well,
the people that are ideally
Yep.
Working in this space, right? Those are the people that need to know this stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So any organization is going to do better if they have high ethical standards, right? Or ethical standards at all.
Yeah.
Right? They're just going to do better because they're going to look at the implications of their work and they're going to have a system that's auditable, right? I can check it. I can see what actually happens. So we need to have organizations which are committed to having ethical products, and then, keep on pushing it down. These are the folks that we're teaching and we're training right now, are data science students, and getting them to think about what is it when I make a choice, what are the implications, right? And how do I raise my concerns in a way that are not, devastating to my career? Yeah.
You had a couple organizational example of organizations that are doing this in a pretty thorough way, right? Deciding whether or not their model is good enough. I'm thinking about the Twitters, the Walmarts, and so on. Can you tell me a little bit about how they're working and how they think about integrity of their predictive models?
Well, I think that different parts of those companies are working really well, right?
Yeah.
So like Twitter, to their credit, when they were called out about this photo centering issue and photo cropping, they immediately started doing research into it to determine the extent of it and the way that the biases went, right? Fantastic, thrilled, but too late. You put that product out into play already. So you need to do it, you need to do that testing ahead of time before you deploy stuff. We need to see if it's going to affect people, right?
Great. I want to turn to the audience really quickly and ask, just kind of remind you that you can submit questions in the chat. I have a couple that probably came in here. I'm going to start hitting these. I haven't really vetted them, but they are coming our way. So let's see. One from Ashley Graves. As a nonprofit, what data is considered professional collection and disclosed, or should they be more scrutinizing because they are often regulated? I don't know if I understand that one completely.
So I do think that professional organizations are allowed to collect a lot of information, right?
Yeah.
We want to be accredited by a certain group.
Yeah.
We're going to share our data.
Sure.
But that agency or professional organization should then have a hard stop on the sharing of that information unless they have permission. Yeah.
Very good. I have a question from a Slido viewer, Anonymous. I'm so glad this was asked. Could you please talk about data privacy in other countries? I read a study from Australia where people were willing to share private medical info over many years. And maybe it's a good time to kind of take a little aside and talk about privacy issues in Europe, Greater Europe, or whatever.
So data privacy is interesting, right? It is not my area of expertise at all.
Yep.
But it certainly comes into play all the time because one of the things I'm asking about is the data that a model is relying on, was it consented to? Did somebody give permission to share that data, right?
Yeah.
How do you know that? Does it come with a little tag on it, right? This has been recommended that
Yeah.
we have a little provenance sort of tag,
Yeah.
right? That says these people have agreed to it. That'd be great. We don't have that right now. Certainly in Europe, the GDPR, which is pretty well known, that it restricts the information collected on people and the retention of that information, right? So that's another thing where you sort of say, well, I've, resigned from that job or discontinued that subscription, so surely they're not still collecting data on me.
Mm-hmm.
But check those terms and conditions,
Yeah.
right? Are they still collecting data? Do you know that or not? Under GDPR, they cannot, right?
Mm-hmm.
Other parts of the world, we just don't know. If it's not explicitly prohibited, then it can be collected.
So we got to be 5-10 years into GDPR. What's the conventional wisdom, or what's the analysis? Where are we at with that?
So I think they're doing a good job in that they are at least fining big companies, right? In order to say, yep, there's a problem. You are persistently ignoring this problem. Fines are a cost of doing business, though, right? It's not a big deal for most companies when we're talking trillion-dollar companies, right?
Yep.
So we need to, and this is sort of what some European countries have done, is to say, if you're going to continue to ignore our privacy laws, then you can no longer advertise or use our information for our from our constituents, right?
Yeah.
That starts hitting the revenue stream,
Yes. Right.
right? And suddenly companies can figure out how to do it. So again, all of this is human. None of this is like just, out of our control. If we decide we want to really crack down on this stuff and not have information shared as widely or shared with permission, because I am fine with sharing data,
Yeah.
but I want to know, and I don't necessarily want you to use my information against others.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. You bet. Another question we may be stretching out from a Slido view. What do you think of the social credit in China? What do you know about social credit?
I know about it, and I am so not the person to talk to you about that.
All right.
Right?
Well,
There's lots of experts on that.
yeah. Thanks for the question. All right, viewers, keep them coming. Some good ones.
Yeah.
This concept of data citizenship.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so I think we've been leading there this whole conversation. What does that mean to you?
Yeah. So to me, it means that we need to be responsible for what we're sharing, but like I said, we've looked at the terms and conditions. We don't have any control over that.
Right.
But we do have responsibility or the ability to affect some of our local functions, right? We can be asking at the school district, are you using predictive software for performance of the kids at school? Right? Well, are we comfortable with that? Is there oversight in a way that's informed oversight so that it's a validated model, so that it's not somehow punishing kids or setting their future path before they've really even had a chance to stretch out themselves, you know? So I think we need to be involved. And I think for too long we've been abdicating that responsibility. We've been willing to say, it's a great app. I love it. And it's fun and it's interesting, or I get the information I need right now.
Yeah.
But we can be asking our local users, how is that going? And we can be insisting that government do more. But we also have, the ability to push back to the companies to say, do not sell, right? You can, takes you forever, but you can tick down through there and get the do not sell button, right?
In the notes that you provided me, you have something that I think is really notable, which is that we should expect the models to be explainable, transparent, and accountable.
Yeah.
So if I were to say, hey school district, what do you got on my son? What can I fairly expect as far as the explainability, accountability, transparency of it?
Yeah.
Are people prepared to do that?
So I think everybody's prepared to do that in the one kid sense, right? Like, of course I expect to know what their grades are, what their attendance are.
Yeah.
Everybody's ready for that single observation level. What you really want to be asking is, what predictions are you making about my son?
Yeah.
What variables go into that? And do you even have accurate data for my kid? Right? Data accuracy is really quite a big problem. And we want to make sure that we are not setting up these things which I think we have a civic right to, where we are not allowing people to make fully informed choices, right? We are restricting their choices so much that because of these predictions, that it's just not fair. But you can go and ask about it. They may not have the answer. That's okay. Bump it up, right? The superintendent certainly knows how much money they're spending on predictive models. Tell us about it, right?
Yeah.
And let's have a conversation about those things.
What about guidelines, governmental guidelines, regulation for the use of data?
Yeah.
Where's that at?
So last week, the White House just released their blueprint for responsible AI use.
Okay.
Okay, and it is the first time at the federal level we've had this big oversight, or not overview, not oversight,
right?
Because they're just recommendations.
Yep.
Right, but I think we're going to have those in the URL at the end, and I really do recommend anybody who's interested in this to look at that document, because it does go through some of the different issues that we should be concerned about, and some of the things that we can do as citizens. Yep.
You cited a couple examples of accountability in this aspect of government operations. Michigan's Midas program.
Oh, yeah.
Florida ID.me, child neglect prediction. What are some of these? So these are case studies that demonstrate what?
Yeah. So, like the child neglect one is a model which takes a lot of different variables into consideration. We don't know all of them, and then scores each family who's been deemed at risk, right, for whether or not there's child neglect happening there. Now, the consequences of having a score of a certain level for child neglect are enormous, right? Your child can be taken away from you. Your child can be put into foster care. Lots of different things can happen. And yet, again, we don't know a whole lot about it, right? It's something that's just operating. Now, to be fair, it used to be simple humans who did that decision, right? They would look at a family and say, I think this is happening, and I need to remove this child, right, from this situation. Lots of biases, problems, prejudices come up there, right? But this, again, is amplified through the use of a predictive model, right? That sort of potential bias can really be amplified. And it's not good. Right? It's not good for our citizens. It's not good for kids. It's not good for anybody.
So how can we be certain of the ethical, standing of a prediction model based on big data? How do we prove or validate that it's indeed ethical? I mean, what does ethical mean to you?
Yeah. So one thing is that we take the time to fully investigate these models before we deploy them.
Okay.
Right? Just hit pause, and then come from a couple directions, the way we would with other types of science and other types of social sciences. So right now we've gone from big data, doing social science-like things, and then immediately applying it to an individual. They've missed 20 steps in the process, right? Let's go back, let's fill in those steps of replication of these results, making sure it's not fragile, making sure it's not dependent on just a few people or a few variables. So those are things that I think would really improve the use of models in the government space, especially. New York City has just started a program, or actually I think in January, all algorithmic models used within New York City for different services have to be audited. That's huge.
Right.
It's a huge step, right? And auditing can be anything from, did they get the right information, to does the prediction actually match what some other process might suggest for this kid or this person, right? So those are things I'd be looking for in the future, right? To have more of that kind of thing.
As it relates to predictive models in schools and behavioral prediction of behavioral outcomes and so on, Can we predict and prevent a school shooting? How would you approach something like that? What kind of data is being looked at? Are people
are doing this. This
I'm
is
sure.
absolutely enormous, right?
Okay.
Because it's a big concern, but it also is very, very imperfect. We get a lot of false positives. We end up with, it's a multi-step process, right? So we get data that's pulled in. It could be social media data. It could be the kids' attendance at schools. It could be their grades, whatever. All that is coming together and gets reduced to a dashboard light, right?
Yep.
Green, yellow, red.
Yeah.
That's a lot of information to condense down.
Sure.
Right? It's not very subtle.
Who's providing this service or platform or system?
There's lots of companies that'll do it.
Okay, really?
Yeah.
Okay.
There's no sort of regulation on who can claim to be a modeler in this area. And this is the way we do things in the States, is that we allow lots and lots of different things experiments to run.
Yep.
And then eventually we'll end up with one that is a good prediction, right? But as far as the school violence thing goes, my concern is, first off, it's very difficult to predict them, right? Very, very difficult to predict using data to predict who's going to be violent. Even talking to individual teachers, they don't have a good sense. They are surprised sometimes that this is the person who became violent. The flip side, though, is that we are guaranteed to have a lot of false positives. A lot of kids who are identified as being problematic, right, or high risk of violence, when in fact they're not, right? And so we need to think about, are we willing to interrupt their education for a model which might then, push them out of the whole educational stream, right?
Yeah, right.
Because, I'm pretty sure that if anybody's called down to the principal's office, they're going to be upset, right? It's going to be interfering with their learning immediately.
Yes.
And then on the school side, you have to think about what resources do they have to take care of those kids, right?
Yeah.
Are they going to provide
Right.
some sort of meaningful intervention if they truly think this is a high-risk person who has a tendency towards violence? What are the resources we're giving to schools? They don't have those resources.
That's right.
So they're left with, a couple options. One is to say, well, we know this person might be a problem, so maybe we just watch for a while. Wait and watch and wait, however that goes.
Yeah.
Or, they have been a problem, and this is just the final thing, and so we're going to suspend them. So now they're no longer in the school system,
Yep.
right? That's a problem.
Yeah.
That's a real
big
problem.
time. That goes.
And again, I'm not an expert on schools.
Yeah.
I'm much more concerned and more, informed about the predictive model use.
Yeah.
So, and the onus in that case of the ethical obligation is both on the developer, right, to really think through what they're doing, but also on the school district to say, is this the best use of our resource, right? Is this how we want to approach this problem?
Yeah, the lives upended thing is it's just almost so paralyzing if you think about it, right? It's one thing to track social media,
Right.
and to say, well, here's that student's manifesto from last week,
Right.
all the way down to I'm sick of everyone and I want to do something about it.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like where, I don't know.
Yeah, who's making that decision?
That's right.
We often have it, there's lots of text analysis, and it's good, right? It's a decent sort of robust process,
Yep.
but it's not perfect. It's not perfect.
Yeah. Right.
And yeah,
No quick answers there. Did
Yep.
we hit everything that we wanted to on facial recognition? Do you have anything additional to kind of
so
talk
I just think facial recognition is the next big disruptor.
Yeah.
And we're going to use it, we use it right now for phones and some access to different places.
Yeah.
And we'll see that it affects people on the margins much more than the center,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
So imagine they're using facial recognition to get into a building, and I cannot get into the building because it doesn't recognize me. And I'm a cleaner, and I am on the late shift, right? So I have to call somebody to get in to let me into the building, and all of these problems I have to deal with because the facial recognition doesn't recognize me.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
And so I lose money. I may lose my job. I certainly lose the credibility and my reputation. But it's not my fault. Right? So we really need to think carefully about facial recognition, extending it further. Yeah.
How about fraud detection?
Big.
Predictive models and that. It's got to be huge.
Huge.
Okay.
We're all using it all the time.
Yep.
Right? If you've got an app on your phone for your credit card that says, hey, you just made a purchase from a foreign country, right? It'll send you a little thing because they're worried about fraud. And I think it makes a lot of sense. There's a huge amount of fraud out there. But again, should we use the same kind of fraud detection software that was developed for the purposes of credit cards on people applying for benefits? Right? That doesn't really make sense. And we need to think more carefully about the systems that we are developing and are, frankly, in wide use at this point for the very people they're supposed to be caring for, right? Instead, it's being used against them. And that doesn't seem right.
No, definitely not. Audience, your turn. We're going to go over back to you and ask you a couple poll questions really quickly. Do you know, I'm not sure I phrased this question right. We'll talk about it in a second.
Okay.
Do you know what predictions are made about you and what they are based on? The answer is, I think a word cloud would have been more interesting.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But
right.
I didn't do that. So let's see here. Because I'll admit, I'm in the know. I haven't a clue or maybe some idea about what predictions are made about me based on, a little bit of research and some conversations with you. But honestly, I don't have a clear understanding of that. So the answers are, no, I haven't a clue what kind of predictions are made about me. You should have some clue after having had this conversation today. I have some idea about what predictions about me are based on. And yes, I understand the entire ecosystem. Do you understand the entire ecosystem?
Nope. But I do have some assumptions, right? Which is that I am shedding data continually, and it's getting picked up somehow. And for the most part, I'm okay with it. But then what about when it has a limiting effect on my choices?
Yeah. Yep.
Then I might feel differently. And frankly, I don't care what Netflix tells me, right? It is not like the recommender system. Most people think about those kind of things as being predictive models. It's true. Those are predictive models.
Yes, right.
Right? But that's very different than saying, I'm going to predict when you're leaving your job, your current job.
Yeah.
And so I will or will not put training into you. Right?
Yeah.
Or, for the female side, they predict that, you're less likely to lose your job or leave your job rather. Right? You're statistically less likely. So we're not going to give you that pay raise. Right? That's a predictive model being used on me.
Goodness.
Yeah.
Here's how the audience answered. I have some idea about what predictions about me are based on. 61%.
Okay,
no
good.
huge surprise there, but that's nice.
Good. Yeah.
Good to see.
Yeah.
Let's pick up our script here. Or rather our questions. So what should we be doing as individuals and people who both request and use data? For people in data science, what should you be able to demonstrate to clients?
Yeah. No, I think this is a really good opportunity for data science companies to deliver more, right? So for instance, the sort of, should we emphasize speed over accuracy, right? These are choices, and maybe they should be emphasizing accuracy more. And how do you do that? How do you build that into your systems? So that'd be one thing. Another, though, is what is the ethical climate within your work group? Can you raise issues? Can you say, you know what, I'm not sure we actually have access to that data, or yes, it exists in this part of the company, but they haven't shared it with us.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
Just because we can get it, should we? Right? So I think looking at how we can raise those kind of questions within our data science community is super important, right? because those are the people who are making the elixir, right?
Yeah.
They are doing it, and we need to have them thinking about other things besides just get that product out, right? We need them to think about what are the consequences of this? Use their imagination, right?
Mm-hmm. You're faculty author of a certificate program called Integrated Data Ethics.
Yeah.
What is that all about?
So that is a 4-part course, I think, on ethics in terms of, it starts out with individual ethics and looking at how I make decisions, how you make decisions, what information we would bring in when we have an ethical conflict. And that means that I'm going to make a choice. Nobody may even know I'm making this choice. And somebody's going to be better off and somebody's going to be worse off. Or maybe it's like between two goods. How do I make that choice, right? What are the values that I draw upon to do that? So that's the first part, is just understanding our own ethics. And then we move into predictive models, of course, as well as the data ecosystem. And then what companies and organizations can do to create a more ethical data science practice. And there's some really very specific things they can be doing.
What about background required for this, or types of people that this would benefit the most? Like, who should be interested in this?
So I think ideally it would be both the people doing the data science work so that they understand how to use their own voices, right? But also the managers who are supervising them and the people who are asking them to do things as well. Not managers, but maybe somebody from another part of the business.
Yeah.
Is it correct that you should ask somebody to do something unethical? Maybe not,
Yeah.
Why would I think it's unethical? What is that conversation like? And this is that, it's ethics are something that we don't talk a lot about anymore in business, especially in terms of a very official, let's figure out what's right and wrong here, right? That's fine, I understand that. Data science, though, is different, right?
Yeah.
The effect that we have on people with data science is far more than any kind of, development of an elixir or production of some other materials, Data science, it moves fast, it hits lots of people. We all know how quickly things go viral. It's a similar thing with predictive models. Yeah.
Great, thank you. This brings us to one of my favorite segments of the show. This is where at the end of the show we play a little show and tell game called What Did You Bring? This is where you and I will both share something that we find either professionally beneficial, personally beneficial, helps us do our work better, or just simply exist in this world in some kind of way. What did you bring, Liz Karns?
So here's what I brought.
What is this?
This is a little ball. It's hard. It's got little bumps all over it. And during the day when I'm working, I frequently stand and work, so I'll push this around maybe on the desk, or I'll take off my shoes and use my feet with it. Mostly it literally keeps the rest of my body alive. It sort of wakes me up and, gives me contact with something. Yeah.
And you use it for your feet or to
massage
yourself or whatever?
I use it all over. It's like it's sort of a fidget toy, but it's also, I think, metaphorically, in that sort of way of thinking, there are lots of pressure points on this that are being activated at once. I have no idea of how it all works.
Yeah.
Right?
Sure feels great on the feet.
Sure feels great.
Especially for those that stand. Those of us that stand, for sure, you need that relief. All right, what did I bring? I brought a podcast recommendation today.
Oh, good.
I listen to a lot of history podcasts. There's the guy named Mike Duncan who produced a famous History of Rome podcast. He did something called Revolutions, where he looks at revolutions over many episodes. So he looked at the English, the American, French, Haitian, Mexican, and so on, all the way up to the Russian. The series just culminated. So like Russia was 160 parts or something like that at 30 minutes.
Wow.
So that's 80 hours of study effectively. So I've done a few of them. I think the French Revolution was absolutely bananas. I recommend that people listen to it. It's about probably 30 to 40 hours.
Okay.
And you just learn so much about the world. Mike Duncan is a great historian, great synthesizer. So we'll share the URL for the Revolutions podcast. which is just culminating now. There's a couple appendices that are being released, but it used to come out on a weekly basis.
Cool.
We're also going to share the URL for the Mahler Ball if you're in the market for something like this. It would probably be good to disperse family members as well. If somebody's interrupting a Zoom meeting, that would smart.
Oh, yeah. No, I wouldn't even, yeah.
Okay, I shouldn't recommend violence with the Mahler, but it is called the Mahler Ball.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Liz Karns, absolute pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I love talking to you.
That's great.
We've got a post-event survey here that I'd like you to take also, please. So click the URL here, the QR code rather. I've got a couple questions for you. How did we do? 1 through 5, give us a star rating. And then, of course, I'll ask you in just a moment after that for some feedback. How can we do better? What did you enjoy about this show? What are topics or subjects that you'd like to see us cover in the future? We take this very seriously, and I'd like to take advantage of this to help us provide better programming for you in the end. So, audience, I want to thank you so much. Again, round of applause for Liz Karns for having joined us today. Stay safe, stay strong. We'll see you at the next keynote. Thank you, everybody.